Thank you very much for that generous introduction. If I'd known there was going to be a eulogy, I would have done the decent thing and died. I do so much traveling these days that I find it hard to keep track sometimes of my schedule. For those of you who also travel, you know how important that is. However, I've finally managed to work it out. I think I have strong control of my programs, and I think it's important that one do that. I want to tell you, I'm delighted to be here in Dayton. Cliff White asked me to come here and join you and to be part of the distinguished panel that he has put together for this series of lectures, and I'm really truly happy to do that. I think it's important that we think and learn a little bit about Latin America, and certainly about our closest neighbor, Mexico, where I served the President and you for 5 years. Unlike some people, I believe, and you're an example of that most people in our country are really interested, particularly today, in Latin America. Scotty Reston, James Reston, the pundit, has written that Americans will do anything for Latin America except read about it. And obviously that's not true. And as I said, it shouldn't be, because it is high time that we looked south. We have been typically trained to look east and west. No less a figure than Henry Kissinger, in a conversation that I had with him a couple of years ago, said precisely that when we had a discussion about the importance of Latin America. He said, "You're right. I, for one, only looked east and west. It is only recently that I've begun to look north and south. And indeed, it is only recently that I've really given Latin America the importance that some of you who have been students of this area for so many years have claimed it deserves." Mexico, to begin with, is not a little tiny country, as some people seem to think. In fact, there are many misconceptions that we have about it. The misconceptions arise probably out of many reasons. Some because we don't give ourselves or get the right information, some because there are misinterpretations, sometimes distortions in our media, willfully or not. Some because we simply don't think it is important. But if you look at Mexico today, you will see that it's a country of 82 million people. A country whose birth rate is now about 2.3%. That's down from a horrendous nearly 4. And the target that Mexicans have is to have it at 1 by the end of the century. Nevertheless, that means that by that time, Mexico is going to be a country with a population of at least 110 million, possibly 120 to 140 million people. That's a lot of people. 50% of the 82 million people that live in Mexico today are 18 years old or younger. Half of the people in Mexico are 18 years old or younger, which means that they're about to come into their productive and reproductive years. And so when you see the demographer's curves, you'll see that there is a big bulge for the next 2 and 3 decades. Mexico is not providing nearly enough jobs to satisfy the new people coming onto the market. At this time, approximately 900,000 new people are coming onto the job market every year in Mexico. Last year, only 600,000 new jobs were created. What happens to the other 300,000? They fall into a job market that already has a great deal of unemployment, a very high rate of unemployment, and a very, very high rate of underemployment. And of course, a great many of them tend to, as the phrase goes, vote with their feet and come to the United States for the opportunities that are offered here. Whether they come legally or illegally, they come here. That, of course, presents problems that we have tried to solve by the immigration bill. The immigration bill, of course, cannot solve all those problems simply by itself. To begin with, the immigration bill is not exactly an elegant document in the engineering sense. It is a document that will require a lot of sanding in the future. I mentioned earlier when talking to the Ashbrook scholars that the Arabs say that God created the horse, but that the camel was made by a committee. And of course, the immigration bill is a committee instrument. That's not to denigrate it. It took a long time to get there. Some of you may remember the Hesburgh Commission work done under the chairmanship of Father Ted Hesburgh of Notre Dame. That was finished at the end of the Carter administration, handed over in March of 1981 to the Reagan administration, and we began discussing it, as a matter of fact, with Mexico and Mexican officials by that June. We took it up with an interesting presentation made by the then Attorney General William French Smith at the Camp David meeting that occurred in June of 1981. And during the time that I represented you and the President in Mexico, I frequently discussed it with the President and with other officials of the Mexican government. The Mexican position, however, is very simple. For them, the illegal flow up to the north is a safety valve. And what they ask is that their people not be exploited and that their human rights be respected. And I don't think that's asking too much. I don't think people should be exploited, however they may have got here, and certainly their human rights ought to be respected under any circumstances in our system and under our system of law. Nevertheless, it seems strange to me, as I know it must to you, when a certain gentleman, a consul general of a foreign country, says in our country to the press, we demand that our people who are here illegally be given their just rights before your courts. That's a strange concept, isn't it? How many countries do you know of in the world where you can say, we demand that somebody that is here illegally have all the legal rights? That speaks really very well of our society, of its generous and kind and magnanimous aspects. But it does present problems, and those problems are going to be a while in being solved. If Mexico is that large, it is also our third largest trading partner after Canada and Japan. And indeed, we have a list of issues with Mexico that is longer than that we have with virtually any other nation in the world. It is for that reason that the mission that we have in Mexico is the largest mission we have abroad. Nearly 1,200 people in the Chancellery in Mexico and in the 9 consulates and consulates general, which are scattered throughout the Republic. We also have agricultural stations, and we cooperate in the Mediterranean fly facilities and in the screwworm facilities. Those of you who are in the cattle business would know that until recently, in the Southwest and in Florida, the fly that dropped the larvae for the screwworm was a very, very destructive insect to the cattle business. We've eradicated that in our country, and at this point we have taken it all the way down through these cooperative measures to the Isthmus of Tehuantepec, and we hope to get it blocked into the Isthmus of Panama in the not too distant future. Now, as we speak about these issues, trade, immigration, agricultural cooperation, etc., you will note that there are no ominous issues. The issues that we deal with Mexico are, and I'm very thankful for this, are not the kinds of issues that we deal when we deal with the Soviet Union. We're not talking about megadeaths. We're not talking about nuclear power. We're not talking about throwaways. We're talking about issues that engage us day in and day out in commerce, in trade, in the flow of people, and in many other things. Indeed, the reason this mission is so large is because we have 27 different offices, agencies, and departments of the United States government represented under the umbrella of the ambassador. By the way, I should mention that half of the people, half of the nearly 1,200 people that work for the American mission in Mexico are Mexicans. They are what we call Foreign Service nationals. Most of them work all their lives, all their working lives. They will work for 30 years. And then they have a certain retirement benefit, able to come to the United States and live on their pensions. Most of them opt for that. Compare that, if you will, to the Soviet mission in Mexico. They have about 350 people. Not a single one is anything but a Soviet citizen. If you go there and you're served tea, most likely the person serving it is a KGB agent. In fact, at least 150 of that mission are known to be KGB agents. In fact, the Soviet Union runs its North American operations for KGB, for secret intelligence and counterintelligence measures, out of Mexico City. They run it for Canada, for the United States, and for Mexico. Why? Because obviously the border is a sieve. It's as easy for people who are on other business to go across as it is for people who are seeking work in the agricultural, piece goods, service industry, or whatever. Being an ambassador, of course, has a great many perquisites. One of the friends that Cliff and I have in common, Pete Daly, was ambassador to Ireland, and he told me that when I came back that I should be careful about decompression. And I said, what do you mean by that? And he said, oh, you'll know. It'll hit you. And I said, well, no, tell me what you mean. He said, well, you know, you get a lot of attention as an ambassador. You get all this business of Mr. Ambassador here, Mr. Ambassador there, and so forth. And I said, well, I thought they would call me ambassador for the rest of my life. He said, they will, except for the ones that call you dummy. I said, well, what are you talking about when you talk about decompression? He says, well, look, here's what's going to happen. Some night, you and Connie are going to be rushing to go to a dinner party. You're going to get dressed very rapidly. You're going to run downstairs. You're going to run out of the house. You're going to slam the door. You're going to leap into the back seat of the car, and nothing will happen. Indeed, he was right. As a matter of fact, when I first got to Mexico, the armored car was only armored on the sides, not on the top and on the bottom. That's obviously a security hole, something that had to be done. So I managed to get, within a couple of months, a completely armored vehicle. The man who delivered it and delivered it to our security people demonstrated it when he arrived, and I wanted to see it too, so I went down, I looked at it, brand new Cadillac with all of the trimmings, and of course, armored, top to bottom, side to side. I said, that's very interesting. I said, tell me now, compared to the other one, if someone were to throw a bomb underneath it, would the integrity be maintained? Would we be secure inside? And he said, oh, yes, sir, Mr. Ambassador, absolutely. And he thought for a moment, and he said, of course, the fall back down to earth might kill you. Drugs are an important element in the bilateral relationship today. A great deal is said and written, and sometimes done, about this nefarious traffic. 38% of the heroin that comes into the United States is produced in Mexico. Approximately 34% of the marijuana that comes into the United States is produced in Mexico. Approximately the same amount of cocaine, while it's not produced in Mexico, that comes into the United States, comes through Mexico. Mexico is a trampoline for South American cocaine. Sometimes it's refined or beneficiated there. The drug traffic produces such enormous profits that with this money, the drug barons have the ability to corrupt up to the highest levels. And indeed they have. Federal, state, and other officials. And I'm sure you're all aware of the fact that in 1985, they not only assassinated, but in doing so they tortured one of our DEA agents, Kiki Camarena, in Mexico. But I would say to you that we have no reason to be sanctimonious. Corruption exists on our side too. Badge carriers sometimes are corrupted. Even FBI men, even judges have been corrupted. It's a lot of money. It takes a lot of character to resist a salvo of $100,000 or $200,000 at a time, or more. And I would say something to you without trying to be a preacher. I would not presume to preach to you or to anybody else. That's not what I am. That's not what I do. But I think we have to understand something about narcotics. The market is here, ladies and gentlemen. We are the market. And none of that garbage would be produced and exported to us if we didn't buy it. And therefore, the solution is with us. We have to confront the problem here at home. We have to decide, our children, our young people, our young adults, and yes, even the older people have to decide what we're going to do about it and how we're going to respond to it. because as long as we keep buying it, I promise you, they and others will keep producing it, and it will be imported into this country. And that's really all I can tell you about that. I frankly have lost faith in the eradication programs. I think they must continue, but I don't think they're going to work. I think what we need is a massive program of education and an even greater amount of commitment if we are to do something about it. And on that subject, if we do not do something about it, I can promise you that it will continue to be a drain on our society and a drain on our economy. Speaking of economies, Mexico's is one of the 15 largest economies in the world. While it has an enormous debt, a debt that was created by a program of development through loans, Mexico also has a great many assets, in addition to its wonderful people. Mexico has oil, as you know. It has other resources, tourism. It now is developing in-bond industries, which are the second largest foreign exchange earner for the country now. And it has a great, great base of technology and a large emerging middle class. However, during the Echeverría and López Portillo sexennia, they tended to drive away foreign investment. And in the doing of that, they also drove away Mexican capital. A great deal is said about this overbearing debt, more than $100 billion. Of that $100 billion, about $80 billion is money owed, or our monies owed, to the commercial banks. Of that $80 billion, about $30 billion is what the American banks are at risk for. But I would make an argument for Mexico being a creditor country to the United States. Why? Because we have defined, using two different sets of criteria, that Mexicans have approximately $60 billion in this country. We found $15 billion just in liquid assets, in deposits and certificates. And from those figures and others, we extrapolated another $45 billion in residences, in condominia, in houses, and all sorts of things that businesses that they invested in here. I don't think that Mexico is really going to get started on its return to viability in its economy, in fact, until you begin to see some of that money flowing back. And we are beginning to see it now. And that's a good sign. It's particularly a good sign also that the government is now, under de la Madrid, and I think this will continue under the successor that has been chosen, Salinas de Gortari, has begun to be more flexible with reference to foreign investment. It used to be, certainly during Echeverría's and López Portillo's time, that the United States, particularly, and other industrialized countries, but most especially the United States, were accused of dominating Mexico, of owning its economy, and of course of being responsible for all its problems. Well, of course, that's not true. The direct foreign investment, total, from all countries in Mexico is 4.2% of its economy. Of that, we have about 60%. That means we have 28%, 2.8% of its economy in total. In short, Mexicans own Mexico, and that is as it should be. But of course, we make very convenient scapegoats and whipping boys for some of the anti-American elements. And some of those tie in very nicely with those people in the United States whom Jeane Kirkpatrick has called the Blame America First crowd. I took the position as the president's and your representative in Mexico that respect was a two-way street. It may sound strange to you, but that went down very hard with some people there. And what does that mean? Does that mean I was disrespectful to the Mexicans? No, never. Never disrespectful to Mexico, to its people, to its authorities, to its leaders, to its institutions. Wouldn't think of doing that. But did insist that in any relationship, be it between individuals or between nations, for that relationship to mature, respect had to be a two-way street. That, with all respect, one party could not be asked to be a whipping boy or a scapegoat. Why did that go down so hard? I remember one particular secretary of the cabinet saying to me, "Jack, you have to understand, we must attack the United States." And I said, "No, with all respect, I don't understand. Why? We have demonstrated we're your good friends. We have demonstrated that we come to your aid when you need help. We have demonstrated that we want our neighbors to prosper, if only for selfish reasons. Why must you attack the United States? We can't accept that, not in this day and age, any more than you would accept that we attacked you." But that's the mindset that exists with certain people, and one that I hope will be overcome, one that I hope we will see mature into this mutually respectful state that I think would be beneficial for both parties and both countries. You in this area are interested not only in industry but in agriculture as part of the total economic picture. It's always difficult to talk about economics anyway. You know, you get five economists in a room, you ask them a question, and you get 5 different answers. 6 if one went to Harvard. But agriculture, for example, why is Mexico not producing enough food to feed its people? Well, there are a lot of answers for that, supposedly. One, some critics would say, is the Ejido program, or the program of communes. But whatever the reasons, the fact is that with a growing population and with the lack of or inefficiency of arable land, Mexico is not feeding itself. Sure, they export winter vegetables and other items, but they must import massive amounts of soya, sorghum, maize, beans even. And we have been of great assistance in doing that through special loans through the Commodity Credit Corporation. That's been helpful not only to Mexico, but I think that's been helpful to our farm program as well. And I would hope that those things would continue. More important than all of that, I think, is the relationship that is beginning to develop between Mexicans and Americans on the basis of our traveling to and from our countries. Mexicans, whatever the propaganda of certain individuals may seem to be, really do like the United States. They really do. And they like to come here. They like to come to visit, to shop, to send their children to study when they can afford it. And I think more and more Americans are, as I mentioned earlier, not only trying to get to know Latin America and specifically Mexico, but also are visiting that country as frequently as they can. I think that's important. I also think it's important that in dealing with this country, Mexico, that we remember that they have a lot of sensitivities about us. They feel that we wrested the Southwest. Never mind that Professor Robinson says in his marvelous work on the westward movement that the Southwest was going to fall into our hands anyway because of the expansion of peoples and because Mexico did not colonize that area or was unable to. But they feel that we have stolen it. And some of the leftist elements feel that the irredentist movement is alive and well and will sometime give it back to them. The irredentist movement was born out of the Garibaldi movement in Italy in the 19th century. Some of you may recall from your text that said, Italia irredenta, Italy together again. And so these people now say, we will get enough Mexicans up in the United States that at a certain point they will be the majority of the population, and they'll stand up and say, hey, this was once ours, and now we're going to join Mother Mexico again. With all respect, the Mexicans that I have talked to do not want that. When they come here for the same reasons that your forefathers and mine came. They come for greater opportunities, and in some cases, with all respect, perhaps what they first perceive as greater freedoms. And what they want is a continuation of the Peace of the Rock. They want to and become Americans, and nothing will move them from that, whatever their descent. So if you hear about that, I hope you will look at it in perspective and respond in that way too. But I think it's important that we understand it. When I was first in Mexico, a columnist wrote something in the American papers that seemed to disturb certain people. It said that a deputy in the Chamber of Deputies in Mexico had asked that I be declared persona non grata. In point of fact, it was true. What was unfortunate is that this particular article omitted the fact that the deputy was a communist. I'm not attacking him. I mean, he's a member of the Communist Party, and he was doing precisely what he needed to do, and it wasn't something that we took seriously. But if you didn't know that, if that was left out, that seemed very, very strange. I happened to be in Washington shortly after that, and I met with the president. My wife tells me to do this when I drop names. Anyway, I met with the president in the Oval Office, and I told him the story. And I said, what do you think of that? And he said, well, he said, if they don't do that at least once a month, Jack, you're not doing your job. I cannot tell you what a great pleasure it is to work for a stand-up guy. I had that pleasure and that honor for 5 years. I was honored to have him ask me to stay on when I chose to come home, as also did Secretary Schultz and others. But more important, I was honored that he really gave me not only his backing, but his confidence. I think that's what has made working for the Reagan administration and for Ronnie Reagan specifically such a great pleasure and such a great honor for some of us. It is something that I shall never forget, for which I'm extremely grateful, and I trust that in those 5 years I served him well, and of course by extension served you well. The most important thing I think a diplomat can do is to use good common sense in representing his country. It was put, again to quote Henry Kissinger, it was put very well by him in a discussion we had. He said, you know, you have to understand the difference between stupidity and diplomacy. And I said, well, Henry, what is the difference between stupidity and diplomacy? He says, it's very simple. If you look at a girl and say, your face could stop a clock, he says, that's stupidity. But if you look at her and say, as I stare into your eyes, time stands still. That's diplomacy. Thank you very much.